Good morning, good afternoon, good day for everybody around the world who are joining our session today. Welcome to the Change Does Matter webinar. Today's session is part of my webinar series that I do in connection with my book Change Matters. And it's always a pleasure for me to connect with people from different countries. I see already some people from South Africa here, Belgium, Germany, just to name a few. It's wonderful to see you here. Today we have 45 minutes and I'd like to make sure that we get the most out of the session. My name is Margit Takács. I'm a change management consultant, a published author of the award-winning Change Matters book, A Trainer and a Coach. I'm very excited to talk to you about navigating the interesting, exciting, and often challenging maze of cross-cultural challenges when it comes to managing any change projects across different cultural boundaries. Today, I would like to talk to you about the different strategies that I believe can help us simplify and demystify the complexities in one way or the other. I'd like to tap on creative approaches that allow us to bring back our wisdom as well as leverage on great experiences. And I want to make sure that we finish the session with very hands-on, small and flexible steps that you can implement. Now, what you will get out of today's session, we're going to talk about cultural programming and the influencing factors around it. We're going to listen to hopefully an inspiring story from my book that will entertain you, but also give you a little insight and thought-provoking setup to consider everything that we discuss, and it will allow us to think beyond the box. And I'd like to make sure that I also gauge your insights on how you would tackle today the different challenges that I will propose to you. Last but not least, your insights for your projects will matter the most, and using an expert's model, Erin Meyer's culture map model, I believe can also add value to your toolbox by the end of today's session. So my first question to you, and please come to the side here and please share what you see on the picture. Wonderful. So we see locust, summer, leaves, grasshopper on a leaf, an insect, an adaptation, some more metaphorical interpretations of the picture. Now, when we do a cross-cultural discussion, often I like showing this picture because depending on where you come from, you might see different things. So some of you described it with the physical, the apparent elements of these pictures, such as the green, the feeling of summer, the leaves, and the grasshopper. And most of the people from the Western societies indeed say this is a grasshopper. But if you were to ask people, let's say from China on this, that they might say they see a pet, because believe it or not, grasshoppers are also invited to be pets for little kids very often in different Chinese communities. If you show this picture, for example, in Thailand, they might see a grasshopper. Probably some of them might see a pet, but many of them would see a delicacy, a snack, because they are used as fried snacks for many people. So this is just a really interesting, tiny representation of how what we see is not always what everyone interprets. And that's why cross-cultural challenges are sometimes so underestimated, because if we work in a very small community, sometimes we forget about how the very evident things can be interpreted in different ways. Food for thought. One book that I personally really like is from Richard D. Lewis, When Cultures Collide, Leading Across Cultures. It's almost 30 years old as a book. He said people of different cultures share basic concepts, but view them from different angles and perspectives. It's like having a sunglass. They look at the same concepts, but they look at it from a different angle, leading them to behave in a manner which we consider irrational or even in direct contradiction of what we hold sacred. What does that mean? We might be talking about the grasshopper, but depending on which environment we grew up in, our glasses will show us different things. We might see the little animal, little insect hopping from leaf to leaf. We might see a snack, or we might see a pet. And recognizing that this might happen with other elements of our project, of our life, it's important to see what we can do about deciphering those possible differences. So when it comes to culture, it's important to know it is learned. It's not inherited. Myself, I'm originally Hungarian, and there are certain behaviors that I picked up in my country of origin. But I've also learned along the way from my colleagues, from my friends from different parts of the world, and from the different places I have lived in. So there is an element of culture that we can attach to someone's country of origin, but we always have to recognize how influencing factors are showing up in our lives. In a moment, I will share with you what those are. Culture affects the way we think, we organize things, how we behave, how we connect with each other, how we build relationship, what is our connection with the environment, and how do we perceive things along the way. It influences a lot. With change matters, and most of you are either change management practitioners or leaders, you know that how we decipher the challenges of change resistance is influenced greatly by the behavior and mindset of our stakeholders. And one element of that mindset and behavior is about what is the cultural background that person or those people hold, and how can I influence them with integrity and respect whilst understanding them at our best. I mentioned to you, when it comes to cultural programming, there are lots of influencing factors. The author I will be referring to a couple of times is Erin Meyer, and in her book, she talks about how you are not that Hungarian, even if you were working in Hungary, or you are not that German, even if you live in Germany, just to name a few, because there are lots of caveats to our cultural profiles. The first one is our childhood upbringing. Did we grow up in a multicultural or a monocultural family? That influences a lot. You might live and work in a third country, but your parents or your immediate community come from different cultures. That will influence your cultural preferences and behaviors, your own preference and personality traits. I come from a central part of Eastern Europe, eastern part of Central Europe, depending how you want to say it diplomatically. In that part of Europe, often people are considered pessimistic or realistic. Now, I am rather on the bubbly side, which means just because my cultural profile from my country of origin is a bit more realistic, my personality traits of seeing the bright side in things influence it. So again, even to me, the cultural profile of any expert would not fully apply. The third one is a social environment and values. Within the same country, you might have communities like a neighborhood or a city, a village, a region that have different norms. Currently, I live in Switzerland, and I'm fascinated by how the 26 little cantons and half cantons have their own cultures within this country. If you work with people from the canton of Geneva, or the canton of Zurich on the German-speaking part, you have very different behaviors, and we have to incorporate that. So social environment, the community we live in, influences it within the same country. The next one is physical environment. I found this one really eye-opening, because if you think of countries where there is a tendency, for example, of natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, fire, those external factors will influence the behavior, the cultural behavior of that state. One not so old example is the country and the culture of Syria. We know that over the last 10 years, even longer, they have been struggling a lot with physical safety, well, the lack of it. That has influenced the cultural profile of that country greatly because of the physical environment they live in. So we can think of geopolitical and environmental impact on the physical environment in which we are operating. And last but not least is the spiritual environment. It's a bit the religion. Are we in religious communities in the country in question? Does religion play a very important role? Are there people who take religion lightly and some who follow it to the extreme? All of that influences the cultural profiles that we are working with today. Now, those of you who are familiar with some of the experts in the field of cross-cultural communication and management, you probably have seen resources from Geert Hofstede, the Dutch anthropologist who is one of the pioneers of the topic itself. In his website and in his toolbox, there are cultural profiles as well. All of them are influenced by these 5 factors. Trompenaar is another cultural model that I will be sharing with you shortly, and also Erin Meyer, just to name 3 out of the full box. Now, what is cultural intelligence? So we want to consider ourselves to be intelligent in many ways. There are lots of different intelligence or quotients. Rory is on the call today. He is an advocate of adaptability, quotient, or intelligence. We probably all have heard about intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence. There is also one that is considering our cultural intelligence. And according to Early and Mosakovsky, it's the ability to interpret someone's unfamiliar and ambiguous gestures, something that's unusual to us, in just the way that someone around would do, and we can mirror it, we can respond to it. To give you a very simple example, if you go to Singapore, I had the chance to live there for 5 years. A very simple gesture in this rather modernized culture is that when you meet someone, you shake hands and you give name cards. And that was quite a surprise for me when I moved there for the first time. When they hold the business card, they would give it to you with 2 hands, and they expect the same. While in Europe, in many cultures, you almost toss it on the table. I've seen that many times, or you give it with 1 hand very lightheartedly. In Singapore, one ambiguous gesture to me was how there was a ritual around it. So we need to learn in terms of physical reactions, in terms of our appearance, how we dress up, let's say in a country like India, where whilst there are modernized communities, there is also a great deal of traditions with the right clothing. Or in Muslim countries where, again, certain parts of the woman's body have to be covered, we all have to adjust to it. Now, when it comes to being culturally intelligent, I'd like to highlight that cultural intelligence doesn't mean that we are experts in every culture. It's just not possible. But a formula that I picked from these 2 authors is that if we have the drive, we want to be culturally intelligent. If we have the knowledge, we have a couple of models and tool references in our toolbox. If we have a strategy and approach on how to prepare proactively for the cross-cultural challenges and we act upon it, we're definitely on the right track towards cultural intelligence. Now, I'd like to share with you a picture that I came across in 2002. That was the first time I left my country of origin, Hungary, and I moved to New Zealand. I love bookstores, and in the city of Wellington, in the central streets. So I was browsing by the different windows of shops. I came across a bookstore that had this picture in the window. I loved it. Having grown up as the daughter of a geography teacher, one of my hobbies was blind maps. Like, you could give me a blind maps and more or less I could tell the countries and the capitals. It was really great fun. So I had a look at this picture in the window and I said, oh, that's cool. That's upside down. And believe it or not, me, the proud blind map player, it took me minutes to find my own country. I don't know how you feel. We are from different countries, but it might take you as well a little while. And as I had to get a copy. So this is the photo of that and that map that I have at home as well. I knew that there was a message in it for me. And I realized that whilst I'm used in Europe, I'm used to having the classical, for them, upside down map where Europe is on the top and in the middle. For them, this is normal because they are the center of the universe. You can actually challenge whether this is an upside down world map or not. And also how we position it is still the same world map, but with a different emphasis. I love this picture because when it comes to cross-cultural challenges, sometimes we need to open up to see the world from a very different angle, even if it's upside down and even if some familiar places might take for you a while to find. So just a little food for thought. I'd love to take time today to share with you one of the stories from my book, Change Matters, stories about taming the corporate jungle and leading transformation. In this book, I have 10 chapters, 10 stories from different parts of my life, different parts of the world that in this book, I really invite the reader to think about what you would have done in that personal or professional challenging situation in my shoes, and what did you learn? And I also share some insights about what possible interventions can help you advance. One of the chapters is called Trouble in Paradise, and it's a chapter that talks about Bali. Long time ago, I was in charge, as a young professional, I was in charge of a project that allowed us in the Asia Pacific region to recognize the best performance, the outstanding performance amongst the 41 countries, some 47,000 employees, 140 people were selected every year, from the smallest tiny island of Samoa to China, India. And there was a decision made that we would organize this event in Bali, Indonesia. I was very excited. I had already known the place as a backpacker, but to be able to do something so meaningful and so positive for my company was a really interesting and intriguing project to do. I was the project manager of the initiative, and myself, I'm come from Hungary. At the time, I lived in Singapore. My boss was Indian, and I had a security manager from Australia and 2 people from Bali, the local event manager as well as the branch manager of our company for the Denpasar city. We were a one project team, and I was to manage this project team to organize this 3-day event. It included quite some particulars, because this was a year after the second Bali bombing. In 2007, the event took place. So security was of the utmost importance. Because of the need to be able to evacuate people, these 140 people, immediately, in case of yet a third Bali bombing, the security manager, while it might sound trivial, had a crucial role in making this event happen. One of the things that he said is that according to local practices, we have to give some money to the police chief so that we would be escorted wherever we are on the island to the airport and the evacuation points at the earliest possible. Now, me being Hungarian, living in a very compliant Singapore, I just did not understand what he wanted to do with the police. Are you expecting me to have in the budget an item for bribe? Well, those of you who have studied ethical guidelines, you probably know it's called facilitating payment, at least at that part of the world. And they told me that this is a standard practice. I gulped and I didn't know what to do, but everyone around me, the big bosses, also said that's a standard practice. And for the safety of the program's participants, we have to make it happen. A little after, there was another proposal. The event manager, her name is Eka, told me, Margit, we need a rain stopper. Like, of course, it's February, it's rainy season. We have a lot of outdoor events, really great Kecak dances planned for this recognition event. Of course, a rain stopper. So for a moment, allow me to ask you, what comes to your mind when you hear the word rain stopper? What do you think that might be? It was a rainy season, and the local event manager, organizer, told me we will need to budget $250 for a rain stopper. Please feel free to write or just unmute yourself and tell me. What comes to your mind? An umbrella. Thank you, Valerie. It could be a tent. Thank you, Sandra. Sandbags. Oh, I didn't think of that. Kati, thank you. A rain stopper. So umbrella.
Transport.
And sorry, a transport?
Transport.
Yeah, a transport to get people from one place to the other. Yes. I see a shaman. Well, Carl, you know something. Can you tell us something about the shaman? Just unmute yourself for a moment and tell us what experience you've got with it, or what knowledge have you got with it?
Well, I presume it's some kind of a witch doctor, religious, spiritual personality. Some people believe in it, others might not.
Exactly. Now, Carl, I admit, and to all of you, I actually started giggling. If you remember I Got Punked show from the US in the TV that was so familiar, so popular at the time, I thought I just got punked. And I giggled. And the local people, the event organizer and the branch manager stood up and said they won't be able to do this event unless I get this item on the budget. And as a project manager, I was very surprised. I really felt it was a joke. But as my boss at the time, the Indian gentleman, explained to me, in many cultures, having a shaman, a Hindu priest in the case of Bali, is a standard practice. And indeed, what the Hindu priest was to do is the day before, he would carry out a ritual to scare away the clouds. Now, coming from a somewhat Western culture, for me, that seemed very weird for a big multinational corporation to consider something like this. But I realized that until I made peace with the idea, the people were walking out on me, and I needed the project team to make sure that this project was to happen with success. Now, it took me a while to get that trust back with the people. But one thing I learned is how we cannot underestimate, with our best intentions, we cannot underestimate how people's cultural programming can influence how we drive any project, how we drive any change. Remember the 5 influencing factors: the childhood upbringing, personal traits and preferences, the social environment, the physical environment, and the spiritual environment. We have to take those into consideration. What I'd like to do now is I would like to give you the chance to connect with each other, and I would like to give you 7 minutes to meet each other and talk about this case study. What is it that you learned from it? What stood out for you? Welcome back. In a moment, we will have others as well join us. Never underestimate how different others from diverse cultures can be. Seek to understand, then to be understood. How true. This is Stephen Covey's wise quote from the book The Habits, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But that's true. First, we need to understand the people from other cultures, and then we should be striving to be understood. How to navigate culture while managing stakeholders in our projects. The story is a rather simple one, but the learnings are still there. Thank you so much for sharing that. Proactively research about the different cultural norms. Listen and observe. So true and so simple. Different levels of knowledge and acceptance depending on country of origin. Very true. So they might be too remote from reading. And it's important that we try to understand what is that knowledge base and how do they relate to the project itself. Also, it's worth acknowledging that some cultures are more resistant than others for changes. It's okay to having challenging changes. It's okay and it's natural. Use Hofstede or other models to prepare. I mentioned already, this is the Dutch social anthropologist. If you just Google him, you will see country profiles that might be interesting for you too. Recognize your own cultural bias. I think that's my personal learning too. I should have recognized that with the lenses of a Hungarian from Europe, I did not see everything the way they did. Go into these conversations with no assumptions, no preconceptions. Fantastic learnings from just 7 minutes. Thank you so much for sharing these. Now, I promised to you that I will share with you a very hands-on model. It's called Cultural Map from Erin Meyer. She has 8 dimensions, and very briefly, I'd like to tell you what these 8 dimensions are. The first one is communicating. The question is whether the people who we are working with are from a low context or high context culture. When it comes to communication, low context is very straightforward. Let's say the US. I tell you what I want to tell you, and I probably repeat it 7 times. Whilst high context cultures are the ones who go a little bit around. It's not so straightforward. Having lived extensively in Asia, I can tell you there are several countries where it's not just what you say, but how you say it, what's between the line that matters. In this model, it's on a scale, and I will show you an example in a moment. Evaluating. Now, this is an interesting topic as well. Some cultures accept direct negative feedback, while others go around the bush, beat around the bush, as we say. They give negative feedback, but they always package it in a nice way. One example, classically, the Dutch often are considered very straightforward. If they don't like something, they tell you, they won't put too much caveat around it. Whilst, for example, in Indonesia, Malaysia, where I had different projects, you have to actually arrange a lunch and make sure that it's packaged nicely, even if you had to break bad news. When it comes to leading, it's probably the easiest one to relate because most of us, even if some of us are just in Europe or just in Asia or just in Africa, we would have seen cultures that are egalitarian, where it doesn't matter whether you are an intern, the janitor, or the CEO, you have equal opportunities. You can go and ask a CEO for a coffee, while there are cultures where it's very hierarchical. Who you know, who you report to matters. Classically, a Danish culture is rather egalitarian, while let's say Germany or even Hungary is rather hierarchical. You have to follow the reporting line. Decision making is interesting too, whether it's based on consensus or top down. A lot of people are surprised when I say that, for example, Japan is hierarchical. You have to respect the seniority of people, but they make decisions based on consensus. They even have an expression for that. So everyone's opinion matter as well there. When it comes to trusting, whether you build trust based on who you know or what you have delivered, that matters as well. Many Western European cultures are rather task-focused, while many, for example, Middle Eastern cultures are relationship-based. So who you know is what matters, and that will influence how you will be able to implement your changes. Disagreeing, some cultures are confrontational. They just tell you something they like or they don't like, and some are avoiding it almost at any cost. Then another one that I personally really love, as a Hungarian, I'm rather linear when it comes to planning steps, planning ahead. I used to work with a Nepalese colleague who became my friend as well. I mentioned to you physical environment influences cultural programming, and he explained to me that having come from a culture, a country that is so exposed to natural disasters, planning 3 or 6 months ahead doesn't have any meaning to him. So they plan, they are flowing with the scheduling. And persuasion is another one of my favorites because it can really lead us on the wrong path. Let's say Hungary is rather principle first, Germany as well, just to name two, where you go with the hypothesis and you show how things can be proven based on the theory, the researches, or the dissertations. While if you work with people mostly from the US, for example, they are application first. Just do it. Show me it has worked. Is there a good practice? And then have you shown me proof of concept? So one is more theoretical and the other one is rather application first. Now, I know that in just a few minutes is quite some information, but I want to show you the power of these tools. So I picked up the countries that were represented in this tiny case study I shared with you. I know the visuals are rather small, but on Erin Meyer's website, you can get access to the country profiles. Now you see these are all on a scale, and they show where you are on a scale based on the average of these ladies' extensive research. Now, the first thing is to get these references and to look for differences. You proactively can prepare, even if you are not 100% Irish, 100% German or Indian. As I look at the participants, you will not 100% fit into that profile, but you will still have influences. So what I can see here is probably the fact that evaluating indirect or direct feedback. In my culture, you give fairly straightforward, also in Australia, but in Indonesia, you really have to package it. I have to make a special effort to prepare not to be so direct with any negative feedback. For example, in our case, the implementation of the project was delayed, and I needed to make sure that it's packaged, it's really done in an environment where they would receive it. Another one that I picked here is the angle of disagreeing. Hungarians, my country of origin, we are rather on a confrontational angle, while if you look at Indonesia or India, just to name a few, they are much more non-confrontational. So I had to prepare not to confront people if we disagreed. As well as the scheduling in Hungary and in Australia is more on the left side, on linear, while in the other cultures, you see, it's on the left, which means they are flexible planning, which influenced the way I could manage that project and any change project ever seen. Being able to come up with a Gantt chart and keeping to it, depending on where different people are coming from, will be influencing your output. So I hope you see that just by using this very hands-on model, and you see you have an international cross-cultural team for your project, it can be a recognition event, it can be a major transformation change project, it would allow you to proactively prepare for it. Now, I would like to just, oops, I'd like to just acknowledge that when it comes to managing change, it's important to recognize that there are challenges along the way, but also with resources such as this, we can plan ahead. So what we covered in this short session, we looked at strategies, your insights, your learnings, different approaches, and a couple of small flexible steps for your success with any change. One useful resource I find is the book from Erin Meyer. I don't get any commission from promoting it, but I think it's really entertaining, easy to read, and worth your time diving into. If you get on her website, you can also purchase the little graphs. I did that once, and I would say it's really valuable. So I can warmly recommend it to you. Something that I'd like to invite you to do, and I found highly entertaining and relevant as well, is to check out this link, and I will send it to you. On this site, you can actually find out what's your cultural profile. For example, Juan, you live in Ireland, but you have different origins as well. You can fill in Erin Meyer's survey and just say, okay, I would like to see how Irish I am. And you would get a graph about yourself and how an average Irish person is like. Myself, I'm Hungarian. There is no reference point for Hungary. So when I lived in Germany, I asked the cultural profile on how German I am. So even if the profile is not available for your culture, it's super interesting. Another practical tip, if you have a cross-cultural team and you can do it on your own for free, invite them to fill in this survey and have a team meeting, even for 15 minutes, to see what your profiles are, because it's one of the best things to recognize cultural differences and agree on the fact that some of your team members might like to be persuaded with theories and hypotheses, and some with application first. For example, it's a really fun exercise and freely available. I only can vouch for it. And last but not least, of course, on my website, margitakacs.com, learn there are different webinars, resources, workbooks that you might be able to browse around and find relevant things as well on. As I promised, and I'm going to conclude in a moment, if you'd like to collaborate with me, I have an 8-week-long online course called the Change Confident Academy, where I talk about 8 dimensions of leading and managing change. These are right here. Every week, should you sign up, you will be able to access weekly videos for 20-25 minutes. You will receive workbooks, quizzes, weekly group coaching sessions, networking with like-minded change practitioners. It's very hands-on and practical. I've been running it for a while. And if you'd like, on the website mentioned there, you will be also able to see the different testimonials from people who've already attended it. So last but not least, I promise that those who attend today, they will be able to stand the chance for winning my Change Matters book. The lucky draw I will do right after our session, and I will share the results with you through a YouTube recording. So you will see who will be able to access this ebook that was published on Amazon. And last but not least, I'd like to just finish with one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I hope today's session was insightful, interesting, and very importantly, relevant as well. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you so much for joining today.